Hello and welcome to the Arbitration Conversation. So in this webisode, we're once again looking to the South. We've started to talk a little bit about arbitration and what's been happening in South America, but now we again are going to be focusing on Colombia and what is happening there, and in Latin America more generally, in the world of arbitration and specifically online arbitration, which of course is growing by leaps and bounds in the wake of the pandemic. So for that, we have an expert in the field and someone who I actually ran across and met probably with respect to UNCITRAL Working Group 3, working to create a global ODR platform. So it's great to see you again. So welcome. We have Professor Nicolás, and I want to say right, Lozada Pimiento, and he's also a lawyer and a professor in Bogota. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see you again in a different context and much more open to ODR.
Very much, absolutely. So first of all, if you want to tell us a little bit about your journey of becoming interested in online arbitration as opposed to face-to-face arbitration.
Yeah, Amy. I started my career back in 2007 when I graduated from law school, and I wanted to do arbitration generally. That was one of my interests. So I wanted to do litigation, but fancier litigation. So I thought that arbitration was a good option. I went for my master's abroad in Singapore, and then afterwards I worked for a British law firm. And there I was really interested and invested in international commercial arbitration, international investment arbitration. I loved every part of it. When I came back to Colombia, that was already in 2011, I joined the Ministry of Justice. And there we were at that time in the process of issuing a new arbitration law. That's the current law 1563 of 2012. And we were working on it. I was coordinating parts of the drafting, and there was a commission, so I was channeling many of the comments. And in that process, I remember vividly that I was working on it, and I was on working hours. I opened Facebook, but there was this advertisement for judge.me. And then I said, like, what is it? I opened it. This is Judge Me. What do they mean? And it was an online arbitration service. And it was like a revelation to me. So I said, like, no, we have to do something about this. Back then, the ministry was very open to implementing electronic means and electronic methods for arbitration. So what we did is that we started working on regulation, on opening every single part of the procedure to virtual hearings, electronic briefings, every single part, e-evidence will be allowed by this kind of mechanism. And afterwards, we also wanted to do specific regulation for online arbitration. And that's what happened later on. So we issued the arbitration statute in 2012. Just one article, very general, saying every single step of the arbitration may be done online. That's it. Basically, and I think it's very good drafting. The commission did an excellent job on that regard. And what we did afterwards at the ministry was implementing it through a decree. We have implementation decrees for big laws like this. And in the decree, we included provisions for what we call virtual arbitration. It's called virtual arbitration under the Colombian regulation. And that was basically enabling online dispute resolution into arbitration procedures in Colombia. And then I was then in love on this. And then I worked in the government for 2 more years, went then to the Ministry of Trade. And both in the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Trade, I was the delegate for UNCITRAL Group 3 on ODR, and that's how we met back then. And being there, I wanted to promote it because even though it was in the law, even though there was regulation for that, nobody was using it. and I started to start advocating for it very vocally. I was just like a voice in the desert, basically. At the beginning, I was just talking about it, and going to conference after conference, going to the Chamber of Commerce of Bogota, to other chambers of commerce. And finally, pandemic happened, and then everyone is now very open to it. And that's why I was saying before, it was a blessing in disguise in a way, because now I think there's the moment for online arbitration and ODR.
And why, I mean, what do you think? And I, of course, in my own head, you know, what was it? You know, what the pushback, and, you know, we still aren't over the line, right? You know, we're still kind of trying to figure out, especially to have anything more kind of global or even within the Americas, right? So even thinking about an ODR platform to really help with e-commerce or trade within the Americas, which would be great. But do you see any movement for that? I mean, what is the state of things, for example, in Latin America?
Yes, Amy. So I think we're trying to get an effort into doing things in ODR. And I think this is a particular momentum for it. So there are several initiatives, successful ones, coming from Latin America. One very famous one that you might probably know about, which is Kleros. Federico Ast, who is the CEO, he is an Argentinian. And it's a wonderful platform that includes blockchain and crowdsourcing for judging. It's extremely interesting. And this is, you know, from a Latin American entrepreneur proposing things. And also Brazil, the Chambers of Commerce of Brazil have done very good and interesting efforts to have ODR systems that will be adapted to arbitration in each chamber. So in that way, you will have many ODRs and many different approaches to online arbitration in each chamber. So that's also very interesting, which also happened in Chile, for instance. They purchased development from Hong Kong, but that's really interesting, and it's also moving there. And in Colombia, you also have Mexico that also has implemented digital justice, and it has very interesting platforms. I was recently talking to Ivan Jesus Rodriguez, which was the engineer behind that. Fascinating what they did. And in Colombia, we're also in the process. We're on the way, starting with the virtual hearings for the moment. The pandemic obliged everyone, both in the judicial and the arbitration fields, to conduct every single hearing and every single part of the procedure online. So we're there. There's a lot more in the horizon, but we are working on it.
And yeah, absolutely. And there's so many different sort of iterations and different kind of platforms being developed. And I'm very, very familiar with, of course, Federico and what's happening with Kleros and some of the other blockchain-based systems, but also these other, Concilianet as well in Mexico and elsewhere. I'm wondering if you see any movement, though, toward kind of a Latin America-based or the Americas in general, where it's one central hub for online arbitration, especially in the world of e-commerce. I mean, have you seen or heard anything like that maybe on the horizon?
Well, yeah, Amy, I believe what I can see now is that the Latin multinationals, Latin American multinationals have done a great job at implementing ODR and showing it to the people, showing it to the customer. Mercado Libre, which is the Latin equivalent to eBay, manages hundreds of thousands of disputes successfully, following eBay's example, I would say. But I would say that the lead is on the private sector for the time being. But I absolutely agree with you. I pray to God that at some point we will get a multinational ODR system for cross-border transactions. It makes the most sense, and it totally helps globalization. So yes, I think what we have to do now is create a network. And if we create a network of like-minded people and we take advantage of the current momentum, I'm sure we can get to this goal of creating an ODR that will be Latin American or even for the Americas as a whole.
I mean, and the thing is, if we could help access to justice for people across borders, I mean, it makes so much sense, especially given the fact that traveling isn't even an option these days.
Exactly.
But what are some of the main points we should think about, though? So for you, if we said, all right, build the ideal system, it's up to you, Nicholas, go for it. You know, what are some of the main points that we should think about for an ideal system?
I will point to three with a little thing to add at the end. The first one will be ease of access. So we have to know our limitations, and one of the main limitations in Latin America is still access to internet and access to justice. They're both under threat. The access to internet, we're making improvements, and according to the World Economic Forum, we're around 67% of access, which is pretty decent to what we had before. But you would say that many people in vulnerable communities or in isolated areas would not have access to these kind of mechanisms. So enabling the access, having it of easy access and also of easy use. So if it's user-friendly, that would be one of the main points that I would like to see in an ODR system for online arbitration, online mediation in Latin America. The second one will be price. I would say that a successful ODR in Latin America will have to be very affordable or even for free. It will have to be either a public system, so it's provided as a matter of access to justice, and in Colombia and also in many of the other Latin American countries, the access to justice is absolutely for free. So that's one of the things that we'll have to look upon. And if not, you have to do it affordable if you want to get into the mass. Otherwise, people will just reject it and will do what they're doing now, and it's just ignoring justice, and in many occasions, having justice of their own, which is, you know, one of the big rule of law issues that we have in Latin America. The third point will be efficiency. So it has to be fast. In Colombia, look, in Colombia, we have some cases starting in 1992 that have not been resolved by the Council of State, but one of our high courts. It doesn't make sense at all. So yeah, our system takes forever, and people will just say, it's too cumbersome, it takes too long, I will just rather not go to justice and see my claim go to the garbage. So what I find really interesting about an ODR system is that you can have your issues resolved in 2 weeks. And that's why I believe that's the future of justice. Justice cannot work without anything of this sort. And finally, of course, and we need to, those three things, I will wrap them up with language. So it will have to be in Spanish or Portuguese. So many of the ODR systems available in the world are still in English. So we will need to look into a way to have Spanish or Portuguese.
Any cross-border, I mean, I remember when we talked about that even with UNCITRAL Working Group 3 all those years ago, one of the essential components has to be multilingual. And really that's another beauty of technology, right? Because technology, when we add in technology, it makes it more possible to help to have multilingual dispute resolution, which is something we need to work on, you know, even within the United States. That's a really important issue here as well, you know, throughout the world. So those are all really important points, absolutely. Well, and what about arbitration in particular? So kind of bringing us back to the question of, because I'm sure you remember the debates back with UNCITRAL, in that, you know, with this United Nations working group, there was a lot of dissension about the enforcement of online arbitration. And I wondered your thoughts specifically on arbitration as opposed to other ODR like online mediation, which, you know, most people are kind of more okay with the idea because it's not binding. But if you have an online arbitration and it's binding under laws like your law that you have in Colombia that you've mentioned, the question is, you know, whether or not you think that's fair. Do Do you think there should be pre-dispute, should not be allowed, only post-dispute agreements to arbitrate? I wonder your thoughts on that, because it's another question that comes up when you think about online arbitration in particular.
Yeah, no, I've been always an advocate for online arbitration. When we were at Ancestral Working Group 3, I was supporting vocally the U.S. government. The Colombian delegation was always stating that we already had the regulation, and everyone should allow for online arbitration entirely. So, but look, in Colombia, there's no legal restriction at all. Everything, if you come to look at it, we will have an ideal regulation for that purpose. But tell me, after 8 years, I've talked to authorities, universities, chambers of commerce, groups of interest, associations, and it's just difficult to change. So for any kind of disputes and for binding purposes, I think online arbitration works if you do believe in general arbitration. If you believe in the New York Convention, it doesn't make much of a difference to believe in online arbitration. The difference or what you will have to take into account is that your online system will have to be adapted to your needs. So think of it. In the first place, if you have a developer, firstly, he needs to understand continental law, the civil law system, because the platform ultimately reflects part of the legal culture. And if you're going to go to arbitration also has a background of culture that you have to include. So that would be one thing. And then also you will have to simplify most of that as a continental law regulation, because you understand it, but you have to simplify it. You don't, otherwise it will be too long, too many steps.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the key, especially if you want it to be all the other things we've talked about in terms of efficiency. And you know, that's the other big difference. I mean, part of the baggage around pre-dispute arbitration clauses is where you have a very expensive and costly and judicialized in-person process that of course raises the cost of the process, and that's, you know, a large amount of the complaints. But of course, if you have a simple system and it's online, then that of course makes things much more palatable, I think, for most people.
Absolutely. And you know what we did? One of the exercises we did after the 19th of law 1563 of 2012 was to have model rules on online arbitration applied to one particular field, which in our case is secure transactions. Mm-hmm. So also based on the work of Ancestral, we said, why don't we apply what we already have for online arbitration and make it work to the needs of secure transactions? And it's a really interesting work. It does respect, you know, the continental law structure. It's much more simplified. And for instance, one of the things that we did that I think it's really interesting is that there are no hearings. It's fast track arbitration because it's asynchronic. We want to have an asynchronic arbitration. Parties upload their documents, and then they don't have a hearing with the arbitrator, and the award is issued electronically as well. So they don't need to see the arbitrator for it to work. They just need to go along with the process, and it's as simple and can go on 2 months. So we simplified it to 2 months, which is compared to 30 years. It's
Well, gosh, I mean, thank you so much. I will say, I mean, just to kind of sum up, I mean, I do think I see a lot of really exciting developments. I think we're seeing how technology can help us, you know, build systems to solve problems and see where arbitration fits into those systems. So it's really great to talk with you. I mean, it's great to see you again, and hopefully hopefully the next time I talk to you, we'll be talking about this global platform that's been created to help create access to justice for everybody.
And hopefully you will come to Colombia. We will be able to discuss it here.
I know.
Person.
Yeah, enough of this. My being in Colombia when I'm talking to you in Colombia, and it's crazy. Columbia, Missouri is not the same thing as Bogota, Colombia.
Yes, that's one thing useful to clarify.
Well, listen, thank you. I really appreciate your taking the time with us today.
No, thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure.